Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. President Biden kicking off the first full day of his trip to Europe with a stop in London. And that's as more intense talks on Ukraine are likely to unfold tomorrow at the NATO summit in Lithuania. NTD's Iris Tao has more from Vilnius, Lithuania.
Earlier tonight, President Biden landed here in Vilnius, Lithuania. He was greeted by the Lithuanian president as well as embassy staff and their families. But before coming here for the NATO summit slated for tomorrow, President Biden spent his whole day in the United Kingdom, meeting with King Charles for the first time after the king was crowned. And President Biden also held bilateral talks and drank tea with the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The two reaffirmed U.S. and UK ties.
Well, Joe, welcome. It's great to have you here. Back in Downing Street. I think you've been here a few times before, I know, but your first time as president. So we're very privileged and fortunate to have you here. Thanks for coming.
But while the two leaders were all smiles on camera, there were issues that they actually disagreed on during their meeting. For example, Washington last week announced that they would send Ukraine cluster bombs, which have been banned by over 100 countries, including the UK. And a Sunak spokesperson said today that the two leaders did raise this issue during their meeting today. And we do expect to hear more from both President Biden and other world leaders in coming days about their stances on it. And besides that, we know that a big topic surrounding this NATO summit would be whether or not, or really how and when, to admit Ukraine into the NATO alliance. So President Biden has explicitly said that he would not support an admission of Ukraine into the NATO alliance during this time period because it is at war with Russia. But we are also hearing a response from Russia today, which said that any Ukrainian membership in NATO would be deemed as a major threat that would prompt a harsh response. And of course, as Western leaders gather here in Vilnius, we know that a top Russian official also visited China on Monday and met with China's Xi Jinping. And basically after the meeting, the official said that, quote, Russia can count on a firm and friendly, reliable shoulder in China. So a lot is on the plate here as both threats from China and from Russia are on the rise. And of course, remains to be seen how Western leaders, including President Biden, in his major speech slated for Wednesday night, will address these issues on the world stage here in Vilnius.
President Biden publicly saying that the U.S. is low on artillery ammunition amid supporting Ukraine. Meanwhile, the leader of the Wagner Group reportedly met with President Putin after the failed coup last month. NTD's Arian Pazdar has more.
President Biden spoke about U.S. military support for Ukraine in an interview with CNN, which aired on Sunday. Biden defended their decision to send ammunition for cluster bombs by saying that the U.S. is running low on other types of ammo. Watch.
They're running out of that ammunition, and we're low on it.
Many concluded that Biden revealed this information by accident, since it's confidential and adversaries around the world could see the interview. To explore this issue and more, I spoke with retired Army Colonel and author of The Nation Will Follow, John Mills.
Is that true? Is the U.S. really running out of ammunition?
Well, yes. I mean, we don't know the exact numbers. They're classified, but I have been on the Joint Staff at the Pentagon, the center of all of this information, and we watch very carefully what's called war reserve levels. You seek the signature of the president to approach or even breach that war reserve. So I am sure we are way past that at this point in time.
A White House official later corrected the statement, telling Fox News that the military has specific requirements for ammunition. Everything we send to Ukraine is in excess of that, so the U.S. is not running out of ammunition ourselves. A few days ago, the Biden administration announced that it will send ammunition for the controversial cluster bombs to Ukraine. Biden is currently in Europe, where he'll attend the annual NATO summit this week. Many European countries are opposed to using cluster bombs because they can leave behind undetonated munitions, which could later hurt civilians.
President Biden is meeting with NATO members this week. How do you think will they react to the U.S. probably sending those bombs to Ukraine?
Well, I double-checked 3 treaties. The cluster bomb treaty, just simply call it the cluster bomb treaty. We are not signatories. The United States is not a signatory to that. The mine treaty, the U.S. is not a signatory to the mine treaty. Chemical warfare, we are a signatory. And it's bad because we just got rid of our last chemical weapons when we don't know what China and Russia have.
Meanwhile, Russia on Monday said that the leader of the Wagner Group met with President Putin just 5 days after the attempted coup last month. The apparent meeting comes as a surprise, as Putin had branded him a traitor and vowed harsh punishment. The criminal case against him on rebellion charges was later dropped. He's reportedly currently in Russia. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
And Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wrapping up her visit to China. In video of her bowing to high-level Chinese regime officials, gathering a lot of attention here in the United States. Joining us now to discuss the visit, we have retired U.S. Air Force General Robert Spalding, who is now a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. General Robert Spalding, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Of course, General. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wrapping up her trip in China. Before we talk about that trip, though, a lot has happened with the U.S.-China relationship post-pandemic, one of which was the CCP allowing the virus to make its way throughout the world because at best of their gross negligence, at worst, that might be a whole different topic of discussion. We're still sort of in a trade war, I guess, with China. 60,000-foot view. Give us your assessment. Where does the relationship currently stand?
Well, I think, we had something similar going on in the Trump administration, which was the Treasury Department and the Department of Commerce were very pro-business and therefore very pro-continuing our engagement economically and financially with China. And then, of course, you had the Department of Defense and Department of State saying, hey, there's a threat that we have here that we need to begin to mitigate. And so that battle also took place within the Biden administration. It's clear now that the Treasury Secretary has gained the upper hand in that battle. And so what's happening is now you have this really stilted relationship, from the United States standpoint, because we can't get our act together completely across the federal government. And of course, now you see in the House and Senate, there's a clear bipartisan view that China is a threat, but at the same time, there's an ongoing or upcoming presidential election where it sounds like this relationship with China is going to be a key policy issue. So as anything with China's way of war, it's intermixed, almost completely with politics, and therefore it gets mixed up with our own politics. And clearly now we have an administration that is pro-engagement with China. And to me, that is very concerning. Just the view of Secretary Yellen, bowing to Chinese officials was just really the wrong sort of view that we want to have. It's not projecting strength. It's not projecting this idea that we need to take care of American interests first. It's sort of saying, hey, let's keep this relationship with China good because it impacts in many cases the companies that are, donating money to campaigns. So it's a big problem for democracies. It's not just America that has this problem. It's really across the free world. And it's one that I've worked to try to, educate people about and then advocate for a change of policy to preclude this type of influence on our political system.
I do want to ask you a little bit more about that. Secretary Yellen's trip comes shortly after Secretary of State Antony Blinken making his way to Beijing. What do you think has come out of these two trips? Does the U.S. still hold the ace card, if you will, in this relationship?
Nothing of substance. Nothing has come out of these meetings that you would consider to be of any substance in terms of improving the interests of America. Certainly, it's used to, I think, convince both America's allies and partners, but more importantly, the corporate sector and the financial sector, that this administration is against decoupling, from China's economy. And what that means is that they're pro allowing the Chinese Communist Party to continue to influence our democracy, and that's the terrible tragedy of these visits.
So do you think the next high-level meeting should take place in the United States from a strategic standpoint? Some have said too many high-level U.S. officials trekking halfway around the country, the world to Beijing in consecutive order might send the wrong message.
Well, I absolutely think that we need to slow down this pace of groveling to the Chinese Communist Party. You know, we should be making them want to come to us. Of course, Xi Jinping has already decided to decouple China's economy from the West, and he's done that, and he's turned towards, Russia, North Korea, Iran, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Middle East, certainly Saudi and Iran. That agreement that was brokered by China really is indicative of the way that Xi Jinping wants to act. But he's more than willing to accept any technology, talent, and capital that he can extract from the West in the meantime. And so I think what we need to do is continue to put pressure on China's economy. It's an absolute basket case right now because it is a communist economy, and it has been turning more inward and less oriented towards the reforms that Deng Xiaoping instituted. So we should make them pay for that. We should make the Communist Party pay for that. We should not be, in essence, trying to prop up the Communist Party, which is what happens when we try to make concessions toward them for trade or anything else.
So, General Spalding, another complicated issue I'd like to get your thoughts on when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. The President, Biden, he's in Vilnius, Lithuania right now for the NATO summit. What should the President's message be?
Well, I think what we have to come to grips with it is that at some point we have to figure out how do we get to a ceasefire or armistice. I've said for a long time that a long-term peace is not in the offing, at least not today. I mean, you look at North Korea, which was the initial, proxy war of the first Cold War. It's still going on, and there's still no settled peace there. So I would expect Ukraine to be the same thing. What we can't allow ourselves to do is sleepwalk into nuclear war with Russia because we are not paying attention to what the Russians have said, which is, Ukraine is a red line for them. And so I'm not saying that we should abandon the Ukrainians, but we should be very mindful of the risk of nuclear war when it comes to this war in Ukraine.
Retired General Robert Spalding, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.